It was supposed to be a day of fun, laughter, and good food, a day to forget about the stress of the workweek. But as soon as I saw Karen pull up outside my house, I knew things were about to take a turn for the worse. I had spent hours preparing for this party, carefully arranging the tables, setting up the barbecue grill, and making sure the drinks were stocked. The sun was shining brightly, and the music was playing just loud enough to set the perfect mood. My friends and family began arriving, their faces lighting up as they entered the backyard. Laughter echoed through the air as everyone caught up, enjoyed some snacks, and played games. It felt like the perfect Saturday afternoon. But then, just as I was flipping burgers on the grill, I saw the familiar headlights of Karen's car pulling up in front of my house. My stomach immediately dropped. Karen lived 2 houses down from me, and although we didn't speak much, I always knew she was the type to stir up trouble. She never seemed to be happy unless she was making other people's lives miserable. Still, I wasn't expecting her to crash my party today. I turned around and saw her standing outside the fence, staring at me through the gate. Her posture was stiff, arms crossed, and her face wore a scowl that sent a chill down my spine. I didn't know what she was doing here, but I knew it couldn't be good. I quickly walked over to the gate, hoping she was just stopping by to say hello. But as I approached, Karen didn't even greet me with a smile or a wave. She went straight into demanding answers. "Why wasn't I invited to this?" she asked, her voice full of disdain. There was no hello, no, I hope you're doing well, just the cold accusation hanging in the air. Her tone made it clear that she didn't think she needed an invitation, like somehow she was entitled to be here. I was taken aback, but I stayed calm, trying to understand what was going on. "Karen, this is a private gathering." "You weren't invited," I explained, my voice steady but firm. Instead of backing down or apologizing, Karen just stood there, eyes narrowing as she studied me. It was like she couldn't fathom the idea that I wouldn't want her at my party. Her glare intensified, and I could feel the tension building between us. I tried to explain again, but before I could finish my sentence, she interrupted. "You think you can just throw a party without inviting me? This is ridiculous," she snapped, her words sharp and full of anger. I wasn't sure what exactly was going on in her head, but it was clear she was frustrated that her presence wasn't being welcomed, as though it was an absolute right. I tried to remain calm. "This is a private event. If you're upset, I'm sorry, but I can't let you join. Maybe next time." I hoped this would defuse the situation, but I could tell Karen wasn't one to accept rejection easily. Her face flushed with anger. "You're going to regret this. You can't just ignore me. I'm part of this neighborhood. You owe me an explanation, and I'm going to make sure you regret not inviting me." Her words made no sense to me. She wasn't even my friend, let alone someone I felt obligated to invite. But Karen wasn't backing down. She turned away without another word, her heels clicking loudly as she marched back to her car. I thought, maybe, just maybe, that was the end of it. But little did I know, Karen wasn't done yet. As I returned to my grill, I noticed her lingering around. It seemed like she was waiting for something. At first, I thought she might be leaving, but when I glanced up again, she was standing near the side of my house, looking around suspiciously. The sense of unease I had earlier returned with full force. I wasn't sure what Karen was up to, but something told me this wasn't the last I'd be hearing from her. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but I tried to push it aside and focus on the party. The atmosphere had lightened again, and my guests were laughing and chatting away. But the sight of Karen still lingering around in my peripheral vision made it hard to relax. I kept glancing over, trying to ignore her, but every time I did, I saw her standing just out of view, watching from behind the fence or peering into the backyard. It wasn't long before I saw her walk back to her car and pull out of the driveway, and I thought, finally, she's gone. I let out a breath of relief and went back to cooking. But as the sun began to set and the party started to wind down, I heard a loud noise coming from the front of my house. It sounded like someone was banging on the door. Curious, I excused myself from the group and walked toward the front of the house. As I approached the door, I saw Karen standing there again, but this time, she wasn't alone. She had brought her daughter with her, and they were both standing there, glaring at me. "Why is your fence blocking the driveway?" Karen demanded, her voice full of entitlement. She wasn't just talking about the gate now, she was talking about the whole setup I'd made, including the path she apparently thought she was entitled to use. I couldn't believe it. First, she crashed my party, and now she was accusing me of blocking her access to something that wasn't even hers. I looked at her, trying to keep my calm but already feeling my patience wear thin. "Karen, this is my property. That gate is there for a reason, to keep trespassers from using my yard as a shortcut," I explained again, trying to be clear. "You're not supposed to be here, and you're not allowed to just use my driveway however you please. You should have respected the boundaries." She didn't seem to care. "This is ridiculous," she huffed, "you've caused trouble for the entire neighborhood. We've been using that path for years. It's the easiest way to get to the main road, and now you're blocking it off." I was speechless for a moment. How could she possibly think she had the right to use my property? I wasn't blocking a public road, just an access point that had no legal claim to anyone but me. At this point, her daughter chimed in. "You know, Mom, you should just call the police. He can't do this." Karen's eyes lit up at the suggestion, and before I could protest, she pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the cops. You'll regret this," she said, her voice dripping with venom as she dialed the number. I could hear her muttering under her breath as she explained the situation to the dispatcher. I stood there, stunned. This was escalating fast. I had never expected Karen to call the police on me for simply trying to enjoy a peaceful afternoon with my friends. I wasn't doing anything illegal. I had every right to block my property and keep people out. But Karen didn't care. She was determined to get her way, even if it meant making a scene. A few minutes later, 2 police officers showed up, and I was left standing on the doorstep, unsure of what would happen next. Karen quickly approached them and began her tirade about how I was blocking a public path, even though it was clear that my land was private property. I couldn't believe it. The officer asked Karen to step aside and then turned to me, his face full of confusion. "So, what's the issue here?" he asked, glancing over at the gate I had put up. I calmly explained the situation. "This is my property, officer. This gate was put up because people, including Karen, were using my land as a shortcut. I've done everything legally, and no one has the right to trespass here." The officer looked over at Karen, who was now fuming. "It's clear that this isn't a public road," he said. "You can't just claim private property as public access because you've been using it for years." The officer's words seemed to hit Karen like a slap to the face. She tried to argue again, but the officer was firm. "You're trespassing. If you continue, you're breaking the law. This man has every right to restrict access to his property." I was relieved to hear those words, but Karen wasn't done. She wasn't about to give up that easily. "This isn't over," she shouted at the officer. "The HOA is going to hear about this. I'll have him take that gate down, and you'll all regret this." The officer looked at her and sighed. "Ma'am, that's not how it works. You're free to leave now. Please don't cause any more issues." With a glare, Karen stomped back to her car, her daughter following closely behind. I couldn't believe what had just happened. It felt like I had just witnessed the peak of her entitled attitude, but I knew this wouldn't be the last time she'd try to cause trouble. The situation seemed to calm down after Karen and her daughter left, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. The officers had reassured me that I was within my rights, and for now, the party continued. But every time I looked over at the driveway, I wondered if Karen was planning her next move. She had already made it clear that she wasn't the type to let things go easily. Later that night, after the party had wound down and most of the guests had gone home, I decided to take a look at the security footage from my cameras. I had installed them after a few strange incidents with other neighbors, and I figured it would be a good idea to keep an eye on things, just in case. As I scrolled through the footage, I saw Karen standing outside the gate, staring at it for several minutes before she left. It was almost as if she was trying to figure out a way to get around it. I wasn't sure what she was thinking, but I had a bad feeling that this wouldn't be the last time she'd show up at my property. The next few days passed without incident. The quiet was almost too good to be true. I was starting to think that maybe Karen had given up. But then, a week later, I received a letter in the mail. The envelope was from the HOA, and my heart sank when I saw the return address. I had a feeling I knew what it was about. I opened the letter slowly, reading the words that confirmed my worst fear. The HOA was siding with Karen. They had apparently received complaints from her about my gate blocking the public access to the neighborhood, and they were demanding that I remove the fence or face legal action. The letter said that the path I had blocked was considered a long-standing shortcut and that I was interfering with the community's needs. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I knew for a fact that my property wasn't part of the HOA's jurisdiction. I had made sure of that when I bought the house, even double-checking the land records. But Karen's influence over the HOA board was enough to get them to take action. This wasn't just an ordinary dispute, it was becoming a battle for control. I knew I had to act fast. I immediately called a lawyer to discuss my options. After explaining the situation, my lawyer confirmed what I already suspected: the HOA had no legal right to force me to take down the gate. The road wasn't public, and they couldn't dictate what I did with my own land. I was relieved, but I also knew this was far from over. Karen wasn't the type to back down, and neither was the HOA, especially after they'd already gotten involved. I decided to prepare for the worst. I gathered every piece of evidence I could find: property maps, photos of the area, and the footage from my security cameras. I made sure everything was in order and that I was completely in the right. I wasn't going to let Karen, or the HOA, push me around. The following week, I received another letter, this time requesting a meeting with the HOA board. They wanted to discuss the situation and see if we could reach an agreement. I knew this was just the beginning of a long fight, but I was ready for it. I was determined not to let Karen get her way, and I wasn't going to back down. The day of the meeting arrived, and I was nervous. Not because I didn't believe I was in the right, but because I knew Karen and the HOA would be doing everything they could to pressure me into backing down. I made sure I was prepared. I had all my evidence ready, every document that proved the land was mine and that I had the legal right to block access to it. I arrived at the HOA office, and as soon as I walked in, I could feel the tension in the air. The room was filled with board members, all of them sitting at a long table, eyes on me as if I were the villain in some neighborhood drama. But I wasn't intimidated. I had done my homework, and I knew my rights. I spotted Karen sitting at the head of the table, arms crossed, a smug look on her face. She was clearly hoping this meeting would go her way, but I wasn't going to let that happen. I took a seat at the opposite end, my heart pounding but my resolve stronger than ever. The board president began by briefly explaining the issue at hand, how my fence was blocking what they had referred to as a public access point. Karen quickly jumped in, adding her voice to the discussion. This shortcut has been used for years, and now we're all stuck using the main road. It's making everyone's lives harder, she exclaimed, her voice dripping with frustration. I let her speak, knowing that she was trying to create a sense of urgency. She wanted the board to think I was causing a huge inconvenience for everyone, when in reality, the only person being inconvenienced was her. Once she finished, I calmly raised my hand to speak. I understand your concerns, I began, looking around at the board members, but the truth is, this is private property. I've done my research, and I have every right to restrict access to it. This isn't a public road. It's my land, and I'm not blocking anyone's access to anything that's theirs. Karen's face turned red with anger. She wasn't used to being challenged, and she certainly didn't like it. You can't just do this, she snapped. We've been using this road for years. It's unfair for you to block it now. Do you have any idea how much of an inconvenience this is for us? I stayed calm, despite her growing frustration. The fact that it's been used for years doesn't make it a public road, I said. It's my property, and no matter how many people have used it, it's still mine to control. The HOA doesn't have any jurisdiction here, and you can't force me to change that. I could see some of the board members starting to look uncomfortable. They hadn't expected me to be so firm in my stance, and they were starting to realize that Karen's arguments didn't hold up. One of them spoke up. Are we sure this is even within our jurisdiction? They asked, their voice tinged with doubt. Another board member nodded. I don't think we can force him to do anything. It's his land, after all. Maybe we should try to resolve this without escalating it further. I could feel the tide shifting in my favor. It was clear that some of the board members were starting to rethink their position. But Karen wasn't giving up that easily. She slammed her hands on the table, her anger reaching a boiling point. This isn't over, she hissed. I'll take this to higher authorities. You'll regret letting him get away with this. The president raised his hand, trying to calm the room. Karen, we've heard enough for now. We need to review the legalities before making any further decisions. But for now, it seems we have no choice but to respect his property rights. It was a small victory, but it felt like a big one. Karen's face was red with rage, but the board members were backing down. As the meeting adjourned, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. I had stood my ground, and it seemed like the HOA was starting to realize they had no real case against me. In the days that followed the meeting, things were eerily quiet. The HOA had made it clear that they would be reviewing the situation, but I knew they were on shaky ground. Karen wasn't about to give up, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that she had overplayed her hand. She had tried to bully me, use her position on the HOA board to push me around, and even call the police. But it was clear now that she didn't have the legal power she thought she did. A few weeks went by, and I received several more letters from the HOA, each one more aggressive than the last. They demanded that I remove the gate, threatening legal action if I didn't comply. But I knew they were bluffing. They had no case, and they were just trying to wear me down. I didn't let it bother me. I continued to keep an eye on my property, checking the security cameras regularly to make sure no one tried to trespass again. Then, one day, while I was out running errands, I got a call from my lawyer. Apparently, Karen had hired one of her own. She was planning to take me to court, claiming that the HOA had authorized the road as a public access point and that I had violated some sort of community easement by blocking it. I wasn't worried, though. My lawyer reassured me that there was no easement in place and that the HOA had no legal standing in the matter. Still, I knew this could drag on, and I wasn't about to waste my time and money in a prolonged legal battle. I needed to put an end to this once and for all. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I reached out to a local news station that specialized in property rights and HOA issues. I wasn't sure how they would react, but I hoped that shedding some light on what was really happening would help resolve the issue. To my surprise, they responded quickly, asking for an interview. A few days later, I found myself sitting in front of a camera, explaining how the HOA had overstepped its bounds and how I was simply trying to protect my property. I made sure to mention how the HOA had ignored my concerns and how Karen was trying to manipulate the situation for her own benefit. The interview aired that evening, and the response was overwhelming. The next morning, Karen called me, but this time, her tone had completely changed. She sounded almost apologetic. "I saw the news," she said, her voice softer than usual. "I realized I may have overreacted. Some of the neighbors have spoken out against me, and I understand now that the HOA had no claim to the land. I was too aggressive in trying to force you to change your property. I'm sorry for how I acted." I was stunned. This wasn't the Karen I had known for the past few weeks, the angry, entitled woman who thought she could control everything. I wasn't about to forgive her completely, but I could tell she had realized her mistake. It was an unexpected turn of events, and I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in a while, I felt like things were finally coming to a close. Shortly after the interview, I received another letter from the HOA. This time, it was an apology for their involvement, and they confirmed that they would no longer pursue any action against me. The letter also reminded the residents to respect private property and avoid trespassing on others' land. As for Karen, the letter stated that she had been advised to step down from the board. It wasn't a huge victory, but it was a win, and it felt like justice had been served. The situation died down after that. I never saw Karen again, and the HOA stopped sending me letters. My fence stayed up, my property was safe, and I was finally able to enjoy peace in my home again. The whole ordeal had been exhausting, but I had learned a lot about standing up for my rights, even when it seemed like everyone else was against me. Sometimes, I still catch a glimpse of someone driving down the main road and wonder if they regret using that shortcut. But I know one thing for sure, no one will ever be able to take my property from me again.